Nowhere to put my cup. Oh. You guys think of everything. All right, so my name is Jessica, and I'm an alcoholic. So I normally do not take notes for a lead. I just pray and let God give me the words, but this felt a little bit like I should maybe prepare a little bit. So I want to say thank you to Bill and everybody for including me in my band. We're going to be playing right after this. Or no, they're going to give away that car to me right before we play. I'm just going to hold it. I'm a little parched. So my sobriety date is February 13th, 2017. It's the day before my daughter's birthday. And I will never forget the party that I was at that weekend. It was supposed to be for her, but I thought it was for me. But I don't remember much about that. Seems to be a theme for us alcoholics. What I want to say is that without the 12 steps, a relationship with my higher power, fellowship with the program, and the support of my husband, who's here tonight, who's playing drums with my band, my parents, who are also here, because normally they have to come see me sing at some godforsaken bar in Medina at 11 o'clock at night. So they're like, sweet, this is on our schedule. I wouldn't be standing here, happy and sober and free. I'd be, as they say in the program, locked up or covered up, which means, sorry about the P, jail or death. And that was where I was headed. Today, the steps have allowed me to become the woman that my higher power always knew I could be, but I just wasn't quite sure yet. The 12 steps are what they call a simple set of spiritual tools, and they are simple. We call them a design for living, which if other alcoholics are like me, which they tend to be, we have no idea what we're doing in life. And having these steps and this guide and how to relate to people and act and how not to be a jerk, they help awful lot. Yep, they do. If you follow them, that's the key. Because they're simple, but they're not easy to execute. So I know that a lot of people who are watching virtually are in detox centers, in rehab centers, all across the country. And so this message, I don't know where the camera is. This message is also for you guys. You may have just gotten here to sobriety. Maybe this is not your first rodeo because it wasn't mine by the time I got there. It gets better, right? Okay, I got one hallelujah there. Yeah, it gets better. My sponsee keeps asking me, are you sure it gets better? Are you sure it gets better? I'm 51. I was born in 1971, and I grew up in a happy family in Shaker Heights. I have a younger brother who lives in New Jersey, and my parents are still married. I had a totally idyllic Shaker Heights liberal, trees, playing in the neighborhood, kick the can. The 80s were an amazing time to grow up. Nothing traumatic happened to me except for a couple hamsters dying. You know, I had a very normal childhood, which is actually the case for a lot of alcoholics. I took my first drink at 13. It was a can of Schaefer's, which I think that's maybe why I didn't really like drinking at first. And it was not love at first sip, like a lot of alcoholics, because I hear that in leads, like, oh, one sip and it was all over for me. Because I enjoyed alcohol use through my 20s. Maybe every once in a while I overindulged. And when I would overdo it, I would just not drink. I'd just be like, oh, that was terrible. I'm not going to do that anymore. And the only time I ever thought about alcohol is like, what am I going to order? It wasn't until my mid to late 30s that my relationship with alcohol would change. And I'd become a full-grown adult, fully baked. I had a husband, nice Jewish husband. I had kids. I lived in Moreland Hills in the suburbs. And I felt like a complete failure in every aspect of my life. I had no idea what I was doing. I was completely unprepared for any of it. I don't know who is, and if they are, how they get there, but I was not. I felt insecure all the time, empty, really disappointed at how bad I was at everything. And I discovered that alcohol and drugs would provide relief, instant relief from what had kind of become constant anxiety, rage, shame, hopelessness, loneliness, guilt, and above all, fear. And sometimes wanting to die, and sometimes trying to die. Fear ran through every aspect of my life. I had fear I was a terrible daughter, terrible wife, terrible friend, terrible mother, fear that I was rotten to my core, fear that I didn't matter to anyone, fear that I would die alone because of all of those things, that I was unlovable. And it completely controlled my life. As an alcoholic, I knew that, well, I still know, I am afraid, selfish, dishonest. Anybody relate yet? I lied, I cheated, I manipulated people, I ran from my problems, all that good stuff, and constantly tried to exert control over other people. There's a great page in my 12-step book that is on page 60, and it's about the actor, and it's a great story. And I show it to people who aren't in recovery because it talks about the fact the alcoholic is like the actor who thinks they're running the show. They're like, the lights have to be a certain way. The people, you stand there, you say that, don't say that, say this. And it creates terrible chaos. And it created terrible chaos. The big book calls it Self-Will Run Riot. So as a result, I always felt like a terrible person. I was always fighting with people, always felt misunderstood. I was constantly anxious, full of rage. And the more I drank, the worse I felt. And I began to think about alcohol constantly. And in my program, we call it the mental obsession. So when I hear people say that they don't think about alcohol, or they didn't, my husband's a perfect example. We'd go to a bar together, and I'd be like 2 IPAs into the night, about 6 minutes after we walked in the door, and he's like sipping his Miller Lite very slowly. I used to get pissed at him. I'd be like, what's your problem? Like, come on, I didn't like to drink alone till later. But the mental obsession is this terrible cycle, and other addicts and alcoholics in here and across the country will recognize it, that I would awaken after a night of drinking, so I'd wake up the next morning, very patchy memories. I used to reach over the bed and see if I could feel where my boyfriend was at the time, and he wasn't there, and that meant something really bad happened. And then I would wake up and I'd be like, I'm never going to do that again. Ever. Never. This is it. And I pop a pill because I wasn't a day drinker, so I wasn't an alcoholic. And then by 2 p.m., I'd already be planning how to drink more responsibly that night. And by 5, I was totally filled with anxiety and couldn't think of anything else but my first drink. Now, all these rules, not till 5, only wine till 7, all these rules. By 10 o'clock, I was completely drunk. And it didn't matter if my kids were there, it didn't matter if I was at an important event, none of it really mattered. And every day began and ended the same way for years. It's called the mental obsession, and it's awful. So I went to therapy because I wanted to figure out, why was I so depressed? Why was I so anxious all the time, What's the problem? Maybe I need to work out more. Maybe I need to meditate or do yoga or take antidepressants. And I tried to be a better wife. I thought that would do it. I tried to be a better mother. I thought that would do it. But nothing took away the restlessness, irritability, and discontentment that I felt all the time, except alcohol and pills. So my life continued this way from 35, because that's when it kind of went, meow, to 46, every single day. I struggled to parent. I struggled with my marriage. I knew it was the drinking, and I knew it was a problem, but I had completely lost the power of choice. And it happens to every alcoholic. We get to a certain point where willpower just doesn't exist, and we're beyond human aid, is what the book says. We're powerless, which is where I got my band. So one day I woke up, same way I normally do. I reached over the side of the bed. Boyfriend wasn't there. I think I remember throwing something at him, but, he usually left because it never got better after that point. So it was the same way I'd always woken up, but something was different. And I later came to understand that this was my first spiritual experience. We talk about that in the program a lot. I knew I had to change. I had no idea how, but I knew I had to change. And I never took a drink or took another drug ever again. That was almost 6 years ago. So I reached out to another mom who I knew was sober because she wrote this thing for the Huffington Post that she called herself a sober warrior. That was my first sponsor, Carly I. She'd been sober for 18 years, which is like, dude, you're a big loser. Was kind of what I thought, but whatever. I thought everybody in AA were losers when I was still drinking. She asked me to come over to talk, and I sat down and she said, "Are you willing to do anything to quit?" And I was like, yes. I really surprised myself with that one. And it was like immediate. I fell in with a couple of real big book thumpers, they call them. And I worked it hard and worked it fast. And it was a vigorous course of action, like the book says. And I was already at step 3 when I had called her. I was completely willing to turn my life over to the care of God. I had no idea what that meant at the time, but I was there. And so in 7 weeks, which is not typical, it depends on who your sponsor is. Some people say, oh, the steps will rise to meet you or whatever. Take a long time, but for me it was 7 weeks. And I completed the steps and did my inventory. I shared it with her. I went over with my inventory and I said, okay, I'm ready to do my inventory. And she said, is there anything you didn't want to tell me that you're planning not to tell me today? And I said, maybe. And there was a few things, the worst tidbits. And she said, well, you get to decide how free you want to be. And she was right about that. Because to this day, I know that I have to be rigorously honest, or I stay sick. So I completed the steps. I did my 6 and 7, turning it over. I made my list of people I had injured, both emotionally and physically. It was long. And I started doing my amends. And that has taken a while, which is fine. But I started to feel this freedom that was promised. They call them the promises in the book. And the steps were the hardest thing I've ever done and the most important thing I've ever done. So I was supposed to say what it was like, how I got here, and what it's like today. I'm in the what it's like today part. I was advised, which I'm glad, not to tell a bunch of awful stories about being found naked in the Metro Parks and all that. Not that that happened to me or anything, but hey, I was alone. That's just... It's not as pretty with that part of the story. But anyways, just kidding, Mom. That didn't really happen. So today I sponsor. I hope my sponsee is watching. She lives in a sober house in Cleveland. I think that they were getting a watch party together. I am happily married to that guy over there standing against the wall. He plays the drum with me. He plays the drums with me. He has had a rough road. He was there in the beginning. And it's amazing. When people support you, it's amazing. It's just amazing. Thank you. I enjoy a great relationship with my kids because they don't have to remember having a drunk mom. They don't have to remember that. A lot of what happened, I kind of shielded them from, I think. Even though they have a couple stories about me throwing miniature drum sets and breaking my toe, but we laugh about it. Ha, ha, ha. It's kind of dark what alcoholics laugh about. But I own my own business. I have friends who love me, who feel like I treat them well. I'm not a jerk. I don't embarrass them too much. All the time, I make living amends to people for the rest of my life. I will make living amends to my kids, to my parents, to my sweet husband, even though I fought with him today, and I was kind of up. But I was in a BM, as my mom calls it. And so all of that happened because of the program. It did. I would be spinning in circles, probably have a DUI, if not in jail, lost my kids, dead, whatever. But here I am. I'm very happy, and I have everything that I could ever want and more. I go to meetings. I work my steps 10, 11, 12 every day, inventory, talk to God, help other drunks. I fold chairs at meetings. I make coffee, et cetera, et cetera. So in my program, like I mentioned, they have something called the promises, and each one has come true for me. And I reassure my sponsee all the time. She's like, are you sure? Are you sure that I'm going to be okay with my past someday? I'm like, yes, yes. You can't even imagine, but it does. This program works, right? 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 If you're not an addict or an alcoholic, you know somebody who you were literally about to completely cut out of your life, or this is the last time they got to sleep on your couch, and now you want to be around them, and it's just amazing. So through the steps, I've come to know a new freedom, a new happiness, freedom from the bondage of self, and happiness through helping other people to recover, and happiness in being present in my life, being able to feel my feelings, not being afraid of them, and happiness I never knew could have existed. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for Bill for inviting me, and all of you for being here and giving to a good cause. And I'm grateful to God and my support system.